With the production of petrol engines here in the UK set to end in 2030, where does that leave car enthusiasts and petrol heads alike? We already know that the likes of Tesla make fantastic fully electric cars, but what about other car manufacturers that are still playing catch up? And where does that leave car enthusiasts? We already know that Volkswagen have been producing the Golf GTI for around 42 years now, so if anyone's going to get it right for us petrol heads, it's probably going to be them. Today we're going to be taking a look at the Mark 7.5 Golf GTE. First introduced to the UK market in 2015, the Golf GTE sought to break the mould. That is, to offer a hybrid that, whilst practical and green-minded, also brought a smile to the face of whoever was behind the wheel. At the time of its release, Volkswagen had already introduced the all-electric Golf E, and the Mark 7.5 platform was already well established across the rest of the range, with the R, GTI and GTD already offering their own unique take on Volkswagen's much-loved hatchback. But where does this leave the GTE? Each of the aforementioned ranges have their drawbacks, the diesel under ever-increasing scrutiny from European and UK laws set to reduce emissions, and current tech and infrastructure limiting the practicality of fully electric vehicles. Here then lies the appeal of this car, its ability to use petrol power with the convenience of a battery that can be charged while stationary or whilst on the go. There's plenty about the GTE to remind you that you're not in something as dull as a Nissan Leaf. Much the same as the GTI and the GTD styling, this car keeps the cross-hatch seats and exterior styling, dropping the red accents in favour of blue, making sure that you don't forget you're in something electric. Under the bonnet, the GTE sports a 148 horsepower 1.4 litre TSI engine combined with a 100 horsepower electric motor. Sadly, these figures peak at different times, which means that when combined with the car's GTE mode, the car produces 201 horsepower. Coupled to the car's 6-speed automatic DSG gearbox, this means it will achieve 0 to 60 in 7.6 seconds. Certainly no slouch, but over a second slower than the GTE's fully petrol counterpart, the GTI. Charging time is claimed at 3 hours to full, and real-world battery performance can differ. In the colder months, the best I have achieved is 16 miles fully electric, although I am assured this almost doubles in the summer months. In theory, on a shorter journey, you'd never have to fill the car up again, taking advantage of the car's electric power instead. But how does this actually translate to the real world? Is the GTE simply a marketing fad in favour of fleet vehicles? Or does the car's setup translate to an enjoyable, or better still, genuinely exciting driving experience for petrol heads and car enthusiasts? So I guess in order to answer that question, we need to set off. Now, as you've probably noticed compared to some of my previous videos, if you've watched some of them, this car is incredibly quiet. At the minute we are in E mode, so fully electric, and that's a good place to start. This car has a number of different modes, including the GTE mode, but let's start with the basics. Down here I've got an E mode button, and I can press it and I can pick between E mode, hybrid, battery hold and battery charge. They're all fairly self-explanatory. E mode is fully electric, hybrid work together as a combination. The car will work out when it's best to be in which mode. Then you've got battery hold, which will retain any level of charge that you currently have. And finally, you've got battery charge, which is what you would use if you run out of electric and you want to gain some again whilst using the car. It will use the petrol engine and use the kinetic energy, such as braking, etc., to regain some charge. Now, interestingly enough, this at the moment, as I mentioned, is a DSG 6-speed automatic gearbox. The GTI and the R, when you pull back on the gear lever, you get the sport mode. Now, in this, you don't have a sport mode, you have the GTE button instead, and you have this B mode, which what that does, straight away as soon as I put it in this mode, It's basically battery charge or battery hold. Now, this is comparable to how the Tesla feels to drive, in that the moment you let off of the accelerator, the car will begin to slow and it will charge the battery. Now, the reason the car doesn't drive like this in default and automatically slow the moment you let off the accelerator is because it's still relatively new. Only if you've driven a Tesla before will you be familiar with this sensation of always having to have your foot on the accelerator slightly in order to progress forward. In a normal car, you would just let off and coast, whereas in this mode it doesn't. And Volkswagen didn't include this mode as a default because they thought it would put people off. And I can understand why, but as we progress and as we get more familiar with electric cars, hybrids, etc. as a whole, then I guess that will become the default for driving, and almost having a car that will coast by itself, a normal combustion engine, will be weird in itself. At the moment we're in fully electric, and I've actually got it in B mode. If I take it out, the car feels a little more freer. It doesn't feel as restricted. It's not automatically slowing down, and suddenly it feels a little more familiar to what you'd expect a normal Golf to feel like. Inside, those that have already driven a Mark 7 or Mark 7.5 Golf will already be very familiar with this. Now, there is one thing that I've not pointed out so far, and that is that this is technically now, even though it's a 20 plate car, is old tech. Volkswagen have just released the Mark 8 Golf, and in that they've got the GTI, the GTE, and a whole host of new cars, and they're completely overhauled and been revamped. Whereas this GTE was the first of and remains fairly unchanged since it was first introduced in 2016. The new GTE is actually even quicker than this and probably makes more of an attempt to be a full-on hot hatch than this does. This still feels somewhat of a crossover between the two. The new Mark 8 GTE will be far quicker, 248 horsepower in fact, so it's quite a significant power increase. But if you want more information on Mark 8 Golfs, there is a channel that I do follow, and it's worth giving a follow if you're interested in everything Volkswagen, and that's Volkswizard. And I'll put a link in the description and a little link up top here, and you can follow him because he's very knowledgeable on everything Volkswagen, far more than I am. So rather than talk too much about the ins and outs of what is included on the 7.5 versus the new Mark 8, we're going to focus on this car, and more specifically on the GTE button, the button that makes the difference. Now, when you press that button, it engages both the petrol 148 horsepower TSI engine and the 101 horsepower electric motor. Although in total they should add up to circa 250 horsepower, they peak at different times. So the most you'll ever get out of this in one hit is 201 horsepower. Of course, as good and as practical as this car is, you don't buy a Golf GTE just because of that. If you were buying a Golf for that reason, you'd buy one of the baseline models. You buy the GTE because you're looking for something that isn't just practical, but is also good fun to drive. And that doesn't happen until you press the GTE button. Press that button, and suddenly the car is transformed. All of a sudden you've got 201 horsepower at your disposal, and it feels every bit as quick as a Golf GTI. Now, I've only ever driven a Golf GTI for maybe a couple of hours, but I remember it being just as fun and just as exciting as this. I've read online in places that with the extra weight from the battery in this car, that the handling is somewhat compromised. Perhaps when you really press on hard, the differences start to show, but if you're going for a normal B-road drive, this car is so rewarding, and it feels every bit as sharp as a Golf GTI. As you would expect in a brand new car, of course, but particularly in a performance model, the steering is well weighted, it's sharp, it's responsive, the car feels fairly well planted. Putting the car in GTE mode, I should add, does not change anything to do with the suspension of this car. It's purely the combination of the electric and the petrol motor, and when they combine, they really do complement each other really well. Of course, there's a slight delay here when you put your foot down to the moment that you actually begin to take off, and of course the faster you're going, the less reliant you become on that electric motor to initially push you along, and the more predominantly you feel that the engine kicks in. And of course there's a key thing here that we're missing over the Golf GTI, and that is of course the 2-litre turbocharged engine. But I must say that the GTE does a pretty damn good job of convincing you that there's something a little bit pokier under the bonnet than you actually have, and that's partly because of the sound that's pumped into the cabin when you put your foot down. I know it's fake, much like the Yaris GR that I recently drove, but you know what, it doesn't matter, because the sound is for you to enjoy, not for others. If you want a loud exhaust and to be obnoxious, you can do that, but the fact that you can hurtle along in this and feel and hear the engine inside here in your own little space is what matters the most. What's going on outside, other people don't really care. And I must say as well, actually, that the way the DSG box works does complement it really well. Some of the DSG boxes, the earlier models, maybe feel a little bit slower, but the one that's offered in the and I'm sure, to be fair, there's probably a few different ones that are offered in the Mark 7 and the Mark 7.5. This one in here, at least, just speaking about this car in particular, feels really, really nice. It responds really, really well, and it complements the car really nicely. You've also got flappy paddles. I don't tend to find myself using them that much. I feel like the DSG box does really well by itself, and it does pick up really, really quickly. Also off the lights as well, 0 to 60 in 7.6 seconds apparently, but I'd say that it feels quicker than that. A few times I've been off the lights where it's been in hybrid mode and I've put my foot down, and obviously the electric initially gives you that initial push, and then the petrol kicks in thereafter, and it feels a lot quicker than 7.6 seconds, I can tell you that. I think what's interesting about this car is that it's the first hot hatch, if you like, or Volkswagen's first attempt at a hybrid hot hatch. And when it comes from a brand that has produced the hot hatch literally from the get-go, they're probably the first manufacturer to produce the hot hatch with the Mark 1 Golf GTI. That kind of means something in itself. As I said, if anyone's going to get it right, it's probably them. The big elephant in the room here is that eventually petrol engines will be phased out too, and this is a hybrid and it's got that petrol engine. But I think that the fact that this is a 1.4 at the end of the day, and it's still managed to put a smile on your face, means that eventually, even if it's by means of fake sound or artificial sounds, or, you know, using tech to enhance the driving experience, that's not such a bad thing. It's just a change that eventually we'll all have to embrace. But in terms of offering a glimpse, if you like, into the future of what hot hatches could be like, the GTE is promising. If you were considering a GTI, but for whatever reason, whether it be a company car, which is the main reason or the main perk I think of having this is the low tax rate on it, or if it's purely because you want to go a bit greener, then the GTE, although it won't ever come quite as close as its petrol counterpart, it's up there. Anyway guys, I hope you enjoyed the video. Please like and subscribe for more, and I'll see you on the next one. Cheers.